quilting friends, it's Carolina Moore, your favorite sewing and quilting YouTuber, and I'm here on the Stitch in Heaven YouTube channel, and I'm so excited because today we have two new friends joining us. Who are those friends? It's our friends Sid and Shelly. Sid and Shelly are rulers that you can use for doing ruler work on your home sewing machine. So yes, it would be lovely if we had all the space for a long arm, but if you don't have the space for a long arm right now, you can still do really fun ruler work designs on your domestic sewing machine, and Sid, Shelly, and I are going to show you how. You ready? Let's get started. What I've done here is I've pieced together some old quilt blocks that I had left over from a quilt that I made several months back, and this is going to be my practice quilt top. I like this because there are lines on here that I can follow and practice in areas that I can play inside. If you don't have quilt blocks lying around that you want to use in this way, then another option would be to just baste together a top with batting and backing and have your top just be a plain fabric. You can also find like a pre-printed fabric, but if you use like a plain solid fabric or small print, you can use a fabric marking pen and rulers to give yourself a grid of imaginary blocks that you've drawn on there with lines. And then you can also give yourself some like half square triangles in there or quarter square triangles. You can draw yourself some different star blocks or whatever kinds of blocks that you want. And then you can practice pretending that those drawn lines are your seam lines. And that's a great way to practice. When you're done, you can use your practice pieces as table toppers, table runners. You can chop them up into smaller pieces and use them as placemats. There's a lot of ways that you can reuse and upcycle these practice pieces, so they're definitely not garbage when you're done practicing. So we have our top, and I've spray basted it together with a backing and a batting. I'm using 100% cotton batting, but whatever batting that you have is great. A low loft works really well because you won't have as much that's getting pushed down by your thread, and you'll be less likely to pucker. So especially when you're first starting, you want to use just a single layer of batting, and you want it to be a low loft batting, so that means not so thick. We're going to use a ruler foot. Now a ruler foot is a different kind of foot. You can see that it has a high edge right here, and that's so that as we use it up against our ruler, the ruler is not going to be able to jump over this so easily. So that's important. You don't want to use just a regular free motion foot. You want to use a ruler foot. You can also see that it is really circular, and that makes it easy to move the ruler around this ruler foot. There's no angles that it's going to get caught on. The ruler foot that you're going to use is going to depend on your machine. So check with your dealer about which ruler foot that you need to get. Basically, there's going to be a high shank or a low shank depending on your machine. I have a high shank machine, so I'm going to go ahead and swap out this high shank ruler foot for my high shank machine. So I just unscrewed the foot screw, and if you look, there isn't an easy way to attach this on mine, so I'm going to have to unscrew that screw all the way. My regular foot has like a notch, so it's easier to put in, but this one, not so much. I need to unscrew that screw all the way, and then I can screw it back in. Now I'm going to make sure that screw isn't tightened all the way, and then I'm going to lower my presser foot so that it's right here on the fabric. And you can see that there's a little bit of give. I want to make sure, and that's why this ruler foot has a little space so that I can decide how close I want it. I want it just hovering over my fabric, and I don't want it to catch on my seams because these seams are a little bit taller. And then I'm going to screw that right in place. And my quilt top is going to just hover underneath this ruler foot, or I should say this ruler foot's going to just hover over my quilt top. And all right, I've got a little bit of catching there, so I'm going to raise it up just a little bit. There we go. And it shouldn't catch anywhere on my quilt top, even when I have big, bulky seams. Perfect. Now I have my machine threaded. I'm using a bright fuchsia thread, so you'll be able to see my stitches really well on this light background. It'll hide a little more on these darker pieces, but I definitely want you to be able to see my stitching on this light background. You can use whatever thread that you want on your piece. If you want it to really hide away and you have something that's got a lot of colors like this, go with a variegated thread. A variegated thread is going to pop colors of stitching, but since there's already some variation in the coloring of the thread, it's going to hide any variation in your learning curve as you're learning to stitch. Now we're going to go ahead and start with Sid, and Sid is great because he's got some straight lines on him and he's also got some fun curvy lines on him. Plus there's this great slot right in here, and I'm going to show you how all these different components work. So when we are quilting, we want to start just off on the edge. It's always easier to start off on the edge because you don't have to tie off anything. If you start in the middle, you're going to have to tie off your threads. Bring your needle down, your needle up, then bring your presser foot up, and you're going to pull up that bottom thread. I'm using a light gray neutral as my bottom thread. You can use a matching thread with your top thread if you want, and that way any stitching irregularities are going to be less likely to show. Now if we haven't done it already, we're going to want to drop our feed dogs. So depending on your machine, this might be a switch down underneath, it might be a switch on the back. I've got an actual free motion button on my machine, and that's going to drop my feed dogs. If you don't have any way to lower your feed dogs, you can just leave it as is, and there are some people who do that, but another option is to just set your stitch length and width to 0, and your feed dogs will still be up, but they won't be moving at all, and you won't have to fight those feed dogs while you're moving your fabric. Also, some people like quilting gloves when they're moving their fabric around. I prefer to actually be able to feel everything while I'm working, but if you like quilting gloves and absolutely get some, if you've never tried it before, you should try out some quilting gloves because lots of people really love quilting gloves. I'm going to start off with Sid here. Sid has some great straight lines and some great curvy lines. He's also got this slot right here that is fabulous for a whole nother technique, and I'll show you in a little bit. And there's also some just regular straight lines over here if we want to play with those. Now, let's say that I wanted to play with this as just like a regular straight ruler. I can line this up exactly with my seam here on my quilt top. And if I have my free motion foot, my ruler foot down, and I'm just going to start sewing. Now remember, you are the one moving your quilt top. You're going to see it's not in the ditch, it's up against here. So let me show that again from a little different angle. You can see the seam line, it goes 1/4 inch away from my seam right here. If I wanted it to line up with my seam line, what I would do is I would find this 1/4 inch marking here, and then my 1/4 inch marking on the other side. I would line that up, and now I can bring my ruler foot over. And I'm getting my stitch in the ditch line. So if you want to have your line next to it to accent your seam line, or if you want to stitch in the ditch, that'll determine where you line up on this ruler. Now I also have this fun arc shape that we can play with, and you can see that there's a big curve in here, and that's actually intentional. It's done so that it'll actually be a sharper point, but we need this curve to match in with our ruler foot. So let's go ahead and play with that. So that gives us a fun scalloped edge design. If you want a scalloped edge in a border, you go ahead and line up this dotted line here with any of your seam lines or your marked lines if you're using a non-pieced top. And then you can make a scalloped edge border along the edge using that line, and everything will be completely straight. It won't go curvy or wonky. Now I've shown you the straight side, I've shown you the curvy side. I want to show you this middle of Sid right here. Super fun. What we need to do is carefully bring the ruler foot down inside this gap. And we're going to be able to take the whole quilt and move it along this line. And when we do that, we're going to get a nice straight line. Now you can do this if you want on a seam line here. You can center that seam line, and you can use this slot within SID to be able to stitch all the way down a seam line if you want. And that's really simple, but we're going to use it for another fun shape, which is a star shape. So let's see. I want my star to end up here in the middle of this quilt block. So I'm going to just line that up. I'm going to start right here on a seam, which will be a great way to, or a great place to bury my thread. If you're starting in the middle like this, what we're going to do is bring needle down, needle up, just like we did before, press our foot up, and then pull up that thread. There we go. We're going to leave these thread tails long and hang on to them. Going to find the center of this block again to be able to make our star in the center. There we go. And now we'll just start stitching. A couple stitches to make sure that this is tacked and I don't have to hold on to those threads anymore. So now I've gone all the way to the end. Let's turn this so you can see what I'm doing a little better. And now we're going to stitch forward. And back. And then right back into the middle. There we go. Now I'm going to be able to pivot this. And there are some little white marking lines here and there and there that let me know that I have centered this on the 45-degree angle. And I'm going to do the same thing again. And then I've made an asterisk or star design. Now if I wanted, I could go ahead and continue this on straight and make an all over design with star after star after star, and I could make stripes of these, and I would offset my stars on the second stripe, and that would make a really great all over design with your domestic machine. And no need to go get a long arm, rent a long arm, or pay a long armor to get a fun all over when you're using rulers like this. Or I can go off in just a random direction and then I can get a meander of stars on my quilt top. Or I can just finish it off to the other side of this block and then I just have a star. Now I could have just started in the middle and not started here on the edge and just made a star just using this part. There's so many different ways that you can use this ruler to make different designs. I'm going to go ahead and cut off my threads here because I want to show you another design. So we've had some fun with Sid. It's time to give Shelly a try. I'm going to go ahead and bring my bobbin thread up here on the edge and get myself started. And Shelly is going to give us a scallop design. Now I want to actually show you how to do this along an edge, along a seam. So I'm just going to travel a little bit. There we go. And now there's this nice dark line right on here. And I can line that up with my seam line to get this a nice scallop. Okay, we're going to start here nestled in our ruler. Now I can move my ruler nestle it right back into the ruler foot and make my next scallop. Now that we've made our arches, there's a couple different things that we can do with them. One is to turn it into a clamshell design, and the other is to turn it into orange peels. Those are the two things that I'm going to show you, but there are so many different ways that you can go with this ruler. Now, this top arch and this bottom arch look like they're completely different sizes, but they're actually the same size. Because of that half inch width on our ruler foot, the edge of our ruler foot to the needle is a 1/4 inch. So if you go a 1/4 inch in on this larger curve and a 1/4 inch out on this smaller curve, they'll actually be the exact same size. So it's genius. Let's go ahead and do some fans, and then I'm going to show you the other side of the ruler when we do our orange peels. So I want this to line up with the top, and this line here is going to line up with that point, and that's going to give us nice, beautiful orange or clamshells. Clamshells are what we're doing this time. Let me do my needle. Let me bring up my bobbin thread. There we go. And you'll see I'm constantly bringing up this rest of this quilt. When you're doing this on smaller pieces, it's going to be a lot easier. The larger your pieces, the more you're going to have this quilt drag down, and that quilt catching on the corners of your table, the edges of your table, is always going to make it harder to move. And when you're trying to keep a ruler still and keep the ruler and the fabric moving at the same rate, it gets a little trickier if you've got a lot of quilt going on. So if you can bunch up the pieces that you're not using, that'll keep things from dragging down and make your job a lot easier. All right, there we go. Once you've done one arch, again, same as before, we're moving our ruler, making sure that black line is lined up with the top of this arch, and this should be in the middle. Now I had something a little shifty somewhere happen because this line is no longer lined up with that center. So I'm just going to go ahead and move it now back to the center a little bit, and that's going to truncate this arch a little bit, but bring me lined back up, and no one will ever know the difference. And you can see we have this fun clamshell design, and we can do this in rows and rows to make an all over on this quilt top. Now for this second part here, I'm just going to switch it up. I'm going to use the other side of the ruler, and I'm going to make some orange peels. I can use these black lines for the tops of my arches again. I'm gonna bunch this up a little bit so I don't have the drag. Now you'll notice that this edge does not come right up to my stitching line, and that's okay. The edge to the stitching line should be a 1/4 inch, and that will make it overlap correctly. And you can see that orange peel design. If I wanted, I can continue it on the other side as well and make an all over of these orange peel designs or an all over of fans. But there's a couple different ways that you can use Shelly. As you're playing with rulers, I suggest you start with a couple and start playing and practicing. On the backs of the cards are some ideas of different ways that you can use the rulers to make all different kinds of fun designs. And just have fun. Practice, play, give yourself a quilt top. That doesn't really matter how it turns out. You're just playing and practicing with thread and seeing what comes of it. By the time you finish a baby-sized sampler quilt top, you will feel so comfortable with rulers and ready to attack your bigger quilt tops and make some really fun ruler work designs on those just using your domestic machine. Thanks so much for watching, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you know so much more about ruler work and are excited to add ruler work onto your quilts this year. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave those down below, and make sure you subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss out on any of the fabulous quilting videos that Stitch in Heaven has for you. Thanks so much, my friends, and I will see you right here real soon. Bye for now.